Constitutional framework. The Constitution of India is the supreme law of India. It lays down the framework defining fundamental political principles and establishes the structure, procedures, powers, and duties of government institutions. The Indian Constitution is the world's longest written constitution. In its current form, it has a preamble, 25 parts with 448 articles, 12 schedules, and 104 amendments. Historical background. The British government started regulating the affairs of India through a series of acts, but their constitutional reforms were not genuinely guided towards ensuring responsible governance in India. Their basic purpose was to control the Indian administration through the office of Governor General or Viceroy. In this process, the British government never tried to dilute the authoritative position of Governor General. The provisions inserted through these acts aimed at weakening our national struggle, but at the same time, these acts contained amalgamation of various provisions that led to the foundation of our present Indian Constitution. Some of the major acts and their details are given. First one, Regulating Act 1773. This act was the first step in the direction of consolidation of British rule and centralization of administration in India. The Governor of Bengal was made the Governor General of the Company in India, and governors of Madras and Bombay were subordinate to him. The first Governor General was Lord Warren Hastings. The Supreme Court was established at Fort William at Calcutta as the apex court in 1774. Second one, Pitt's India Act 1784. It was introduced to remove the drawbacks of Regulating Act 1773. It was named after then Prime Minister of Britain, William Pitt. It placed the Indian affairs under the direct control of British government. It created a new body called Board of Control for managing the political affairs. Next, Charter Act 1833. It is also known as St. Helena Act 1833. The beginning of constitution making during the British rule in India is founded in this act. It made Governor General of Bengal as the Governor General of India, and all civil and military powers were vested in him. First Governor General of India was Lord William Bentinck. The government of Bombay and Madras were deprived of the legislative powers. The British colonization of India was legalized by this act. This ended the activities of East India Company as a commercial body and became a purely administrative body. It attempted to introduce the open competition for selection of civil servants. However, this provision was negated. Next, Chartered Act 1853. The legislative and executive function of Governor General's Council were separated by this act. It introduced a system of open competition as the basis for the recruitment of civil servants of the company. Accordingly, the Macaulay Committee on Indian Civil Services was appointed in 1854. It introduced for the first time local representation in Indian Legislative Council. Next, Government of India Act 1858. The Act transferred the government territories and revenue of India from East India Company to the British Crown. The powers of British Crown were to be exercised by the Secretary of State for India. That's why the Secretary of State was the member of the British Cabinet and was assisted by the Council of India, having 15 of its members. The Secretary of State was vested with complete authority and control over the Indian administration through the Governor General as his agent, and he was responsible solely to the British Parliament. the Governor General was made Viceroy of India. Lord Canning was the first Viceroy of India. Next, Indian Council Act 1861. This act for the first time introduced representative institution in India. It provided that the Governor General's Executive Council should have some Indians as the non-official members while transacting the legislative business. In 1862, Lord Canning, the then Viceroy, nominated 3 Indians to his legislative council: the Raja of Banaras, the Maharaja of Patiala, and Sir Dinkar Rao. It initiated the process of decentralization by restoring the legislative power to the Bombay and Madras presidencies. This policy of legislative dissolution resulted in the grant of almost complete internal autonomy to the provinces in 1937. It also provided for the establishment of new legislative councils for Bengal, Northwestern Frontier Province, and Punjab, which were established in 1862, 1866, and 1897 respectively. It empowered the Viceroy to make rules and orders for the more convenient transaction of business in the council. It also gave the recognition to the portfolio system introduced by Lord Canning in 1859. Next, Indian Council Act 1892. The number of additional members in the Governor General's Council was increased by the introduction of this act. Additional members in the Provisional Legislative Assembly were also increased. It increased the functions of legislative councils and entitled them the power of discussing the budget and addressing questions to the executive. Next one, Indian Council Act 1909. This act was popularly known as Morley-Minto Reform. The Lord Morley was then Secretary of State for India. Lord Minto was the then Viceroy of India. It changed the name from Central Legislative Council to the Imperial Legislative Council. The maximum number of nominated and elected members of the Legislative Council at the center was increased from 16 to 60, excluding ex officio members. It provided for the first time the association of Indians with the Executive Council of the Viceroy and Governors. Satyendra Prasad Sinha became the first Indian to join the Viceroy's Executive Council. He was appointed as a law member. It introduced the system of communal representation for Muslims. Lord Minto came to be known as the father of communal electorate. Next, Government of India Act 1919. The Government of India Act 1919 was based to the great extent on the Montego Chelmsford's reform. It has a separate preamble which declared that the objective of the British government was gradual introduction of responsible government in India. By the introduction of this act, bicameral legislature was established in the centre. The upper house was known as Council of States and the lower house was named as Central Legislative Assembly. The members of the upper house was fixed at 60 members while the lower house consisted of 146 members. The upper house was elected for 5 years and the lower house for 3 years. Separate electorate was retained for minorities. The system of hierarchy was introduced in the province. The provisional subjects were divided into reserved and transferred ones. The subjects were divided between the center and the province. The central subjects were defense, foreign affairs, currency, railway, and telecommunication. The provincial subjects included education, health, irrigation, and local government. The Governor General's Executive Council was responsible to the Secretary of State for India, who was sitting in London. The Governor General retained the right to certify any legislation which he considered essential. The Act provided for the establishment of public service Commission in India for the first time. Simon Commission. It was constituted in 1927 to inquire the working of the Act of 1919 under the chairmanship of John Simon. It placed its report in 1930, which was examined by the British Parliament. The Commission recommended the abolition of diarchy and extension of responsible government. Government of India Act 1935. It provided for the establishment of All India Federation consisting of provinces and princely state as units, but the federation never came into being as the princely state did not join it. The act divided the powers between the centre and the units of three list. First one, federal list for centre within 59 items. Next, provincial list for provinces with 54 items, and the concurrent list for both with 36 items. Residuary power were given to the viceroy. It introduced provincial autonomy instead of diarchy in provinces. It introduced responsible government in provinces, that is the governor was required to act with the advice of ministers responsible to the provincial legislature. The provinces were now autonomous units of administration in their own fixed sphere. It provided for the diarchy at the center. Thus the federal subjects were divided into reserve subject, transfer subject, but the provision did not came into operation at all. It introduced bicameralism in 6 out of 11 provinces, that is Bengal, Bombay, Madras, Bihar, Assam and United Provinces. There was a legislative council, upper house, and legislative assembly, lower house. However, many restrictions were placed on them. It also provided separate electorate for depressed classes, that is scheduled classes, women and labor workers. It abolished the Council of India established by the Government of Indian Act 1858. The Secretary of State for India was provided with a team of advisors. It extended franchises and about 10% of the total population got the voting right. It provided for the establishment of Reserve Bank of India to control the currency and credit of the country. It provided for the establishment of Federal Public Service Commission and Provincial Public Service Commission and Joint Public Service Commission for 2 or more provinces. It provided for the establishment of Federal Court. Next, Indian Independence Act 1947. This act provided for the creation of 2 independent dominions of India and Pakistan from August 15, 1947. It defined the territories of the 2 new dominions and made possible the adjustment of existing boundaries. The accession of other boundaries was to be done by the Boundary Commission. The dominion of Pakistan was to have 2 wings, East Pakistan and West Pakistan. East Pakistan comprised East Bengal and Sylhet district taken out from Assam. West Pakistan included the Northwest Frontier Province, West Punjab, Sindh and Balochistan. The 2 dominions were to have a Governor General appointed by the King for the purpose of governing the dominion. The act was provided that the same person could be appointed Governor General for both the dominions. The legislature of each of the dominions was free to make laws for that dominions, including the laws having extraterritorial operation. No act of British Parliament was to be passed after August 15, 1947 to extend either of the dominions. The lordship of British government over the Indian states lapsed, and with it all treaties and agreements between the Britishers and the rulers of Indian state came to an end. The Indian states became independent in their political relation with the government of the new dominions. The ascent of the Parliament was given for the omission of the royal titles like Emperor of India. Dominion and provinces and other parts were governed in accordance with the Government of India Act 1935 for the interim period. The provisions requiring the Governor General or any other governor to act in his discretion or exercise of his individual judgment would cease to have effect from August 15, 1947. The Governor General was, however, invested with the absolute powers until March 1948 to issue orders of the effective implementation of Indian Independence Act 1947. The division of the assets between the two dominions to adopt or modify the Government of India Act 1935 and to remove any difficulties that might arise during the transitional period. The Act of 1947 provided for the abolition of the office of the Secretary of State for India and his advisors. The two dominions were given freedom to join or not to join the Commonwealth. The members of the civil service and the judges of the Federal Court and the High Court appointed before August 15, 1947 would continue to serve in either of two dominions and would be entitled to receive all facilities in respect of their remuneration, leave, term, pension, etc. as they enjoyed before independence.